So I was like selling things and losing money and still having to pay taxes on what I sold. It made no sense whatsoever. So that kind of, you know, and if you go nonprofit, you need a board of directors, you need bylaws. Some of that stuff can be downloaded and you can just fiddle with it. I mean, not your board of directors, but if you Google like bylaws of a small press, you'll probably get some sort of template that you can just fiddle with. Make the decision of whether you want to do this all yourself or you want a group of people to be doing it together. There are advantages to both. Doing it by yourself, you get to do what you want. Doing it with other people, at least in theory, you have other people working. I mean, that can be hard too. Volunteer organizations, not everybody does the same amount of work, but you get more heads together, more ideas, more people who know, you know, like how to set type. You don't really set type anymore, but people who know how to do design work, people who know how to do marketing, people who know how to reach out to other writers, that sort of thing. I would do some Googling, but basically I would say just, God, I sound like the new Colin Kaepernick ad, just do it. Get on your knees and do it, because you will be on your knees sometimes. And, you know, feel free to contact me or someone else who's doing publishing, because we all, by this point, have been through the ringer, right? We might be able to answer your questions. Yes?
I was on an airplane once coming out of Oahu and the engine blew up. That's the Pacific. Could I write about that?
You know, that's a good question. I do not, if you're living in St. Louis, you're not a Pacific writer. Yeah, I'm sorry. I have occasionally sort of, you know, widened my stipulations, but usually it comes down to it's site specific, although the site is incredibly huge. Yeah.
Is your publishing company a print publishing?
Yeah, we do chapbooks like this. This was a handmade chapbook. We do books. More books. So yeah, we do print, but then what we do is with the chapbooks, which are just the little sort of brochure booklet kind of books, when they go out of print, we put them online. So on our website, there are PDFs of a lot of things, which I find a good way to, you know, if someone wants to teach something and I don't have any more copies, they're very welcome to use the PDF.
How tough is it to compete with the online publishing now that, you know, that's more endless?
Well, you know, I had a graduate student once who put it this way. You know, you used to have fancy hardcovers and then you'd have the beaten up paperbacks, right? Now the function of print, at least in poetry, seems to be almost as a kind of art object in part, right? So our books are fairly inexpensive for these kinds of books, but we have this kick-ass designer who, you know, these are just beautiful objects, right? And you still can't do that online, right? Because you got the screen. So that's why I like books, is you can mold them as objects. Now, as for competition, small press publishing is not anywhere that you're going to make money. I mean, nonprofit is really the best thing you can do. So what it's really all about is creating community, trading things, selling things to people who are few and far between but incredibly passionate about things. So we have an audience in Australia, New Zealand, Mr. Parr here from New Zealand, even in places that aren't in the Pacific, because the writers we publish are in some sense more necessary now than perhaps they were 20 years ago. or seem more necessary. So, yeah, I choose fervent over multitudes.
There are online journals as well.
There are lots of them.
I got for mine, so that's why I was wondering.
And Gillian has one, spacecraft. Well, no, I mean, it's,
It's small.
no, but there are tons of them.
Screen size.
And again, Google is your friend. If you want to find, because the other thing is, if you want to be published, you need to find a publisher who publishes stuff like what you're doing, right? And that I know was my mistake starting out, was I just knew there, there's the New Yorker, there's Paris Review. I had, next to no idea, right? So what happened when you start to get published is when you realize that, hey, this publication specializes in stuff like mine, and then you write them a cover letter that says, I have read, your publication, and I especially liked X, Y, and Z because, give them some heft. And I thought you might be interested in my work, and then describe a little bit what it is that you're doing in your work and why you think they might appreciate it, and then, over and out. So, yeah, that's how it works from the other end when you're trying to find a publisher. So when you Google, right, look at online journals, but look at like 100 of them, right?
Other questions? Yes.
One last book for me. I was just wondering, like, your book about dementia with your mother, like, okay, like that's a book and publication. Would you, if someone wanted to make that into a movie, do you seek the moviegoers, or do they seek your, like, I like this, I think this should be seen all over, let's make this into a big screen. Do you do that, or do they come after you?
Well, that I do not know, believe me. There was a point at which, because I also did a second volume that has a lot of almost theatrical situations in it, people talking, interacting, and I actually tried to get someone to do like a one-woman show where she would read from the book and maybe act like the characters, and I thought this was a wonderful idea. So did other people, but they never did it. I still would like to see that happen, but in my case, it was just like, theater people are way too busy. Way too busy. As for movies, I'm not the person to ask.
Maybe like small documentary style Sundance-ish stuff would like that probably.
And there have been,
like the Glenn Gould movie you're talking
yeah, there have been experimental films about dementia which circulate, but again, they circulate on the,
Which would tie into form. And like I
Right.
was talking with Casey and David about David's mind of form, where you kind of, how can you make dementia come alive on the page, the way you were talking about blogging forward and backward and cutting in and out to past and present and fading out.
yeah, that would be a whole other series of decisions.
But it's
And
good to think that way, like she was with her dog photos, like thinking across arts to feed your writing, as well.
Since you're into experimental writing and seeing how you can mix up forms or come up with something new, how readily do publishers accept that? So,
well, again, it's certain publishers, right? Although one of my favorite, if I can have a minute, one of my favorite stories is I was teaching one summer in Scotland. It was Napier University or something. And they had an MA program in writing. The head of this program got up at the opening dinner and said, "We do not have poetry because you cannot make a living at poetry. We only teach people to write so they can make a living at it." So immediately, of course, I rise to my feet and we get in a big argument. We became friends. So then she announces she's gonna share some of these exercises she uses with her fiction students so that they will learn to write to make a lot of money. So I went because I was curious. And she was doing this N+7 exercise, which is like a French experimental exercise where you take every noun in a piece of writing, you circle it, and then you count 7 nouns down, and you replace in the dictionary. Except she had found this online machine that does it. Well, I have done so many Trump tweets this way, and other politicians. I have cooked them in this machine, but I went up to her afterwards and I said, that's a poetry exercise. What are you talking about? So I think there are these interesting ways in which she's basically making the argument, you can do this really weird stuff in fiction and someone might pay you for it.
So very much related to that, and also to the questions that have come about prose and so forth in this conversation, I am continually reminded of I believe it was Robert Duncan who said of Frank O'Hara that his work involves, quote, language which never forgets that it is language. And I love that phrase, and it's sort of like, it's almost like a koan to me. It's like, what exactly would that even mean, or how would you recognize it? But I think we all know writing. You mentioned Beckett's eye. I mean, Samuel Beckett is a brilliant example of a writer who, in whatever form, whatever craft he's sailing on, whatever form he's in, the language never forgets that it is language. And I think a lot of your work is interested in that very phenomenon. And
well, language is also a form, right?
Right.
And so you can play with language as form as well as language as this conveyor belt. Right. You know, yeah. I don't so much like language as conveyor belt. I want language to be something that is itself part of the subject matter and the texture.
So Creeley's statement about form is never more than an extension of content. That's sort of
Yeah.
Gets away.
And content is never more than an extension of form, I suppose.
Last question. So. But to say her story that the exercise, that the exercises from poetry can feed fiction.
Yes.
And films and that these
Yeah.
exercises are really like a way in, right? A way in all kinds of ways. If you're doing family autobiography,
Yeah.
what's a way in? Was it David?
Yeah.
So I really don't have a question, but I actually do have an answer for James' question.
Yeah, good.
There's a contract agreement called an option, which is when a studio writes a script based upon a book, is they approach the author of the book for the 12 to 18 month exclusivity rights, and then within that time they have to have the script finalized, if they have it cast, director, crew, and all that ready to go before they can sell, before they demand an offer, which is about average about $50,000, depending on what it is. That is one kind of what that means. But they have 12 to 18 months to get that set up. Otherwise, that studio loses that option, and another studio can option out that story based on the script.
So now you know.
Now I know. But I mean, I had friends in graduate school who had this joke, because when you sign a contract for an academic book, it's sometimes you're supposed to sign off the movie rights. And everybody's like, a movie about,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you. We're gonna Left Bank Books is in the back. They're here. Alon has been here with some of Susan's books.
Patiently.
And we'll hang out for a bit, and I can also help stamp your parking passes if you brought your green parking passes.
And if anyone wants to look at Tinfish books, like touch them and open them and look at them, please do. I just brought a few at random here. And if anyone wants a tea leaf for tomorrow's Cardinals game,